I hope you boys have learned as much from me this year as I've learned from you. You've taught this city how to trust the soul of a man rather than the look of him. And I guess it's about time I joined the club. Herman, I sure could use your help. Ed Henry's kicking my ass out.
All right, hello, this is Cameron Gardiner. You just saw a clip from Remember the Titans. And I want you to focus on how the community and the individual are interacting with one another. They're acting on one another to make a better world, sometimes to make worse in the whole movie. But in that particular clip, you have communities and people working together during that time. And so that's going to be the theme that I'm going to be exploring in Canticle for Leibowitz, how the individual and the community act on one another, who's responsible for what is done, and who holds them accountable for such. And we'll start with page 62, if you just look in the italicized part. It says, "Let us stone and disembowel and burn the ones who did this thing. Let us make a holocaust of those who wrought this crime, together with their hirelings and their wise men. Burning, let them perish, and their works, their names, and even their memoirs. Let us destroy them all, and teach our children that the world is new, that they know nothing of the deeds that went before." And here you see the people who have suffered through the nuclear bomb, how they hold a whole community responsible for the tragedy. It's not just the people who created the bomb. It's not just the people who pressed the button to destroy the world. It's a whole community of literate people, of people who know they are villainized and they are held responsible for their crimes. Now, whether that's good or bad, the text doesn't say, but it says that whole communities, not just individuals, are held responsible for their crimes. But in even more explicit text, I think if you look on page 169, you'll see that Dom Polio is speaking, and he says, or thinking, and he says, "But I am a Christian monk and priest, and I am therefore accountable before God for the actions and deeds of every monk and priest who has breathed and walked the earth since Christ, as well as for the acts of my own." So here again, you see communities, individuals, even dead communities, being a part of this sort of collective guilt, this collective sin, and that the view in the book is that before God and before people, not just individuals are blamed for things, but whole communities, specifically the scholarly community in Canticle for Leibowitz. But they have a much fuller idea of sin, of who's responsible for good things and for bad things. And that leads me to my next point in page 212, where Thontadio is speaking. And it says on the bottom of 211, "But then the words came back to him. For in those days the Lord God had suffered the wise men to know the means by which the world itself might be destroyed. He also suffered them to know how it might be saved, and always let them choose for themselves. And perhaps they had chosen as Thontadio chooses, to wash their hands before the multitude. Look you to it, lest they themselves be crucified." And of course, that's a Pilate reference, where Pilate washes his hands of the guilt of the thing that he's done. But here again, you see the community interacting with the individual sin. You see this character sort of bucking against everything else that has been done and said before, where he just does what he does in a vacuum and cannot be held responsible for what will happen in the future or what has happened in the future. So this brings me to my thesis in Canticle for Leibowitz. Both communities and individuals are held responsible by people for contributing and destroying humanity. And so there you see that there's that people, not only is the community important, but individuals are important also. And so far as the Holocaust and the things that have come before, it's not just pointed as one individual who pushed the button to destroy people or one individual who created the atomic bomb, but whole communities. And whether it's good or wrong, it is what happens in the book, how the characters view their world, except for Seathan Tadial, who recognizes what's going on, but tries to relieve himself from that guilt, tries to absolve himself from what's gone on in the book so far. And so that is the community versus the individual and responsibility and the Canticle for Leibowitz.
I'd like to begin on page 64 in the beginning of the book, where it reads, Edward Leibowitz had won permission from the Holy See to found a new community of the religious, to be named after Albertus Magnus, teacher of St. Thomas and patron of men of science. Its task, unannounced and at first only vaguely defined, was to preserve human history for the great-great-great-grandchildren of the children of the simpletons who wanted it destroyed. Its earliest habit was burlap rags and bindle stiffs, the uniform of the simpleton mob. Its members were either bootleggers or memorizers, according to the tasks assigned. The bootleggers smuggled books to the southwest desert and buried them there in kegs. The memorizers committed to rote memory entire volumes of history, sacred writings, literature, and science, in case some unfortunate book smuggler was caught, tortured, and forced to reveal the location of the kegs. Meanwhile, other members of the New Order located a water hole about 3 days' journey from the book cache and began the building of a monastery. The project aimed at saving a small remnant of human culture from the remnant of humanity who wanted it destroyed was then underway. So the church was a sanctuary for people that were educated and running from the simpleton packs. From the outside, at least, the order seems to be only about preserving knowledge. Inwardly, though, as is revealed in one of the later chapters of the novel, the Albertian order of Leibowitz turns from simple preserving information to innovation. On page 149, it reads, well, if he's going to work in the alcove, said a coroner, we'll just have to take the crucifix down and hang it there temporarily. There's no other. Heathen, hissed the librarian. Pagan, desecrator. Armbruster raised trembling hands heavenward. God help me, lest I tear him apart with these hands. Where will he stop? Take him away. He turned his back on them, his hands still trembling aloft. Don Paulo himself had winced slightly at the inventor's suggestion, but now he frowned sharply at the back of Brother Armbruster's habit. He had never expected him to feign a meekness that was alien to Armbruster's nature, but the aged monk's querulous disposition had grown definitely worse. Brother Armbruster ran. Turn around, please. The librarian turned. Now drop your hands and speak more calmly when you... But, Father Abbot, you heard what he... Brother Armbruster, you will please get the shelf ladder and remove that crucifix. The color of the librarian's face left the librarian's face. He stared speechless at Don Paulo. This is not a church, said the abbot. The placement of images is optional. For the present, you will please take down the crucifix. It's the only suitable place for the lamp, it seems. Later, we may change it. Now I realize this whole thing has disturbed your library and perhaps your digestion, but we hope it's in the interest of progress. If it isn't, then you'd make our Lord move over to make room for progress. In this quote, one can see how a piece of technology as simple as a lamp is able to strip religion from its connection to education, showing how progress will not come from God but from man, which leads one to believe that humanity is bound to make the same mistakes as before, stray away from God once more, and encounter the same miserable end as the people before them. On page 261, by the end of the book, I'd like to start where it reads, crossing the highway to the old abbey was like crossing an eon. Here in the new aluminum and glass buildings, he was a technician at a workbench where events were only phenomena to be observed with regard for their how, not questioning their why. On this side of the road, the falling of Lucifer was only an inference derived by cold arithmetic. from the chatter of radiation counters, from the sudden swing of a seismograph pen. But in the old abbey he ceased to be a technician. Over there he was a monk of Christ, a booklegger and memorizer in the communion of Leibowitz. Over there the question would be, why, Lord, why? So one can see that when science had been obtained to its full extent, the reason of seeking knowledge had changed from the why to the how, losing the complete meaning of life. Hope to the future changes from God to man, signaling the end of religion due to it having been overtaken by science.